Welcome to the Weekend Prime Time. We got a stark reminder this week that saying you will stand up to Donald Trump's corruption and actually standing up to Donald Trump's corruption are two very, very different things. The latest example this week happened when Senate Republicans spent nearly 20 hours voting on and ultimately passing a $70 billion package to fund Trump's immigration agenda through the rest of his term. Not only does that bill boost funding for ICE, but it also leaves that controversial Trump DOJ settlement fund completely untouched. That is the $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund that critics worry would be used to pay off Trump allies and even January 6th insurrectionists. That's the same one that even some Republicans slammed before they ultimately voted for it, of course. Senator Thom Tillis called it stupid on stilts. Senator Mitch McConnell called it utterly stupid, morally wrong. And yet, in the end, they both voted for that bill without any real assurances that the fund was dead. What makes this vote even more confusing is the fact that the Trump DOJ lawyers yesterday confirmed in a pair of new court filings that the fund is dead, at least for now, something that acting AG Todd Blanche emphasized earlier this week on the Hill.
We are not moving forward with the fund, period.
You and Associate Attorney General Woodward signed earlier documents regarding the settlement and this fund. Would both of you now sign and release documents reversing the DOJ's position on the fund?
We're not moving forward with the fund. I'm not sure what that means to sign documents reversing. There's nothing to reverse. We're not moving forward with the fund.
Yeah, of course, we should just take their word for it. They're good for it. They deserve the benefit of the doubt. After
Norms have gone really well.
Exactly,
this
norms,
administration and first term.
Things not written down, things not written on parchment, in the Constitution. All of those things going super great. I think what's most striking, what's kind of most frustrating for me is the amount of adulation and kudos that some of these lawmakers got when they briefly made those, alliterative criticisms about stupid on stilts and whatnot. Like we have a clip, I think, from Thom Tillis where he says that, of course, he's not going to vote for this legislation. Let's play that.
If this does not get added to the bill, could you support passage?
No, I'm not gonna vote to get off. I voted to get on it with the goal of potentially getting an amendment done or supporting some other members' amendment.
And then, of course, in the middle of the night, he votes to pass it anyway.
I mean, all signs seem to point to them finding one way to do this or another. And Tillis and all these other guys, they're very well aware of that fact. Already, I think it's hundreds of former January 6ers have lodged sort of administrative complaints with the DOJ in a bid to get money. We know from the reporting that there were efforts from this administration to signal to many of those people that they would get money. This was before we even knew about the $1.776 billion fund. And so when you hear Blanche say they're not going forward with this fund, that does not mean we are not going forward with a mechanism to get cash into the hands of people who experts believe may use that cash to go purchase weaponry and to prepare to do something like this again in the midterms or 2028.
Well, and I think more critically, what Trump probably cares about even more, because it's most in his interest, is the audits on himself and his families. And that hasn't been struck from any agreement and is still in play accordingly. And so talk about a get out of jail free card. If any American is told they don't have to pay taxes and can just operate however they want in this country, and gets permission to do so, do you think Donald Trump and his family will not fully take advantage of that?
I mean, there is this real question about whether they ever have to pay taxes again. It depends on how you read the language of this settlement agreement, but on its face, it looks like they at least cannot be audited for past tax returns that the New York Times says that they may have owed, Trump himself may have owed $100 million on. So that gets written off. And then there's the question about what about tax returns, taxes, period, that might have been due in the years ahead.
Well, speaking of taxes and why he may potentially have any vulnerabilities with that, let me read some of the headlines this, I guess like over the last couple of weeks, to be honest with you, of just the brazen corruption and shady, questionable behavior by Trump and his family. ProPublica reports that the White House intervened to get a $620 million deal for a company tied to Donald Trump Jr. The Associated Press, Trump discloses thousands of stock trades, some in companies directly influenced by his policies. ABC News, Trump family crypto venture tapped as part of a $2 billion Emirati-backed investment deal. And of course, the infamous Air Force plane. Oh, sorry, I should say Air Force says the former Qatari 747 that was gifted to Donald Trump, or to the U.S. government, I should say, is, I guess, almost done being retrofitted. Air Force One will be ready to be used this summer. So you can see why, with all of this potential income and gifts coming down the pipeline, he certainly does not want the IRS to be able to say, hey, we should look into some of these dealings. In-kind gifts.
One incredible headline, though, from this past week, Eamon, which is Ivanka Trump revealing this very interesting, sort of sketchy island that she, Jared Kushner, and others are working on. And for anyone who has not seen this really special video of her reflecting on its creation, take a look at this.
An unbelievable, beautiful 1,400-hectare private island in the middle of the Mediterranean. We were on a friend's boat, and we stopped for a swim. Effectively, that's how we found it. We swam to the islands. We went on a hike, barefoot all the way up to the top, and we were just captivated. And it stayed with us ever since. And over the course of many years, we developed the opportunity to help realize its potential and transform it, but with a lot of restraint and care, because the land is so beautiful.
I did not know that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump were like the modern day Christopher Columbus, like going out into discovering islands, just discovering islands,
barefoot hiking
on top of these, going into the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea, where no one has ever gone before to discover this island.
But they're going to develop its true potential.
It's ecotourism.
Well, the beautiful
no question.
The beautiful thing about that is that the Albanian people have taken to the streets by the thousands to protest the idea that the Kushner family and Ivanka Trump, or the Trumps and all their various investment partners, would somehow develop this pristine island. And so what's funny enough is that it has triggered and created this like political crisis. So now, not only are we, that's perhaps like our greatest import right now, is like our own political turmoil, and our corruption is now being exported. It's being exported to other countries.
More than America.
I know.
It would be nice if we had similar pushback against, say, Don Jr.'s deal. Let's talk about this. With his 1789 venture fund, he invests in a company called Vulcan Rare Earth Magnets that, granted, our country does need. We need to encourage production, but suddenly they come into an amazing multi-million-dollar package from DOD to super turbocharge their business. And the valuation of the company went from the time that Don Jr. invested $200 million to $2 billion. Someone, a White House advisor, picking up the phone. Nothing to see there, just your first son's investment.
He's just a shrewd investor.
Look, it was on the wedding registry, and so Papa couldn't attend, but he bought him a nice gift. So there you go.
No, but it's honestly the level of corruption, and I think the broader point that is being ignored here is, why are we not seeing pushback, right? It kind of goes back to what you were saying about people like Tom Tillis and others. And you see these moments where we get excited. I certainly got excited when you see like a Republican saying like, oh, I'm going to block the nomination of Kevin Warsh if this doesn't happen. Or you see some people. Also
Tom Tillis.
That's what I mean. So it's like these moments where you're like, is this the moment where some Republican is going to say no and say like, this is a bridge too far? And time again, we just are constantly. So there's no oversight from Republicans. There's no willingness from Republicans to do it, and the Democrats just completely don't have the power or the willingness to fight, and sometimes just
they're in the minority.
I mean that is the most important part. But,
they're in the minority.
But there have been times where some have just gone along with some of the votes and still help for it to get across the finish line. Not in these specific deals, but in the broader agenda, as opposed to trying to just grind everything to a halt. You want more funding for ICE raids. you've got to grind that to a halt. You got to find a way to grind it to a halt. You can't just be saying like, well, if the president wants some more money for the funding, we're going to work with him as long as the ICE agents are unmasked or we know their names. I mean, like, yeah, those are nice, important things. But that doesn't stop people from killing people on the streets of America.
Well, in this case, they don't need Democratic votes, right?
And they didn't.
They also still have plenty of money to keep on operating.
That's also true.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I think Trump seems to be successful at kind of like calling people's bluff on these things and just sort of bulldozing ahead is also that the public is not. I mean, there are these organized protests that come every couple months via No Kings and whatever else. But when you watch what's happening in Albania right now, it kind of gave me pause for a moment, wondering why, like, what they're experiencing is sort of a fraction of what we've experienced over the course of the last year.
Right.
And like, I found myself watching that podcast where Ivanka's talking about just that one island project. And I was like, I would like to go back in a time machine and like show this to a French peasant in the 1700s, because I'm like, that was blow their brains out. You know what I mean? And I guess I'm just wondering why Americans aren't sometimes reacting more forcefully to the headlines that you read through.
I think it all kind of blends together. Steve Bannon was right about the flood the zone with doo-doo, that like there is I don't know if I'm allowed to say the real word that he said, whatever. That there is so much stuff to keep track of, so much corruption, so much self-aggrandizement, so much potential self-dealing. I mean, we've been watching them potentially take down the name of the president from the Kennedy Center. Like, that's one of so many different things that if it had happened in isolation, maybe people would be out in the streets. People were out in the streets for the Women's March, right? Back in 2017, before anything had happened. But
and the Muslim ban at the airport also triggered a lot of protests and backlash.
Maybe people just feel powerless at this point. But they have at least an electoral process coming up, which we're going to talk about next.
New today, residents are pushing back against the rapid growth of data centers for AI across the U.S. amid growing concerns about the environmental impacts on communities.
This is the beautiful city of Maysville. Oh, sorry, could you not hear me? That might just be the two pre-existing data centers right behind me.
Georgia Power is expecting all of the tax citizens and the landowners here to subsidize their project.
Go look into China and their data centers. They are using like windmills and not using water.
There's 18 of these turbines back here, and they're wanting to put 41 in place.
And leading the charge is activist Erin Brockovich, consumer advocate and environmental activist, who is joining me right now. Awfully good to have you back on the show, Erin. Thanks for joining us. And look, everybody knows you famously battled a giant gas company, as portrayed in that Oscar-winning film starring Julia Roberts. And now you are tackling AI. Prior to launching your website, Brockovich AI Data Center Reporting, you wrote, if data centers are so great, why are they being built in secret? How have companies managed to build hundreds of facilities under the radar? These things, I mean, they're huge, so many of them. You can't miss them.
Yeah, no. So, the whole thing started for me when I had 30 individual emails from one community about data centers. That's usually a signal for me that something's going on. And so I wanted to see the bigger picture about what was happening with data centers. So that's why we created the map. I was stunned within 3 days that 47, 48 states were reporting. And you just asked a great question, because that's exactly what they all started to report to me. How this happened. They had no idea these proposals came through. They felt like it was in the middle of the night. They were secret. It was behind closed doors. So they became very concerned at that point. Why did we not know? What is the secret? What is the push? And they had no say in it. So that's what's really started so many of these communities across the country and their frustration about these data centers and how they got there.
And look, you've noted that you're not completely opposed to data centers. So what aspects of them are you against?
Oh, well, we're all concerned about data centers. I think there's a conversation here about AI and data centers. This isn't necessarily a conversation about AI. This is about the data centers and where you're placing them. And they're being placed on top of schools, on top of residents, in, hospitals, in locations. And again, you said these things are monstrous. And what's happening from proposal to construction to running, Let's talk about the non-disclosure that's really frustrated people. They're extraordinarily concerned about their water. They're extraordinarily concerned about their energy bills, which many people are now reporting in the facilities that are up and running. They are double and triple the electric bill. They're very concerned about all of this on top of an already strained infrastructure system. Not to mention, they're very worried about the land, what's happening to the wildlife, and most importantly, what is the future impact on their health, and the just enormous reports coming from people about the noise. They said it is so loud. This is a 24/7 situation, nonstop, just in your ear, humming, hissing, and buzzing. And people just feel like they're going crazy there.
So AI advocates say that these data centers are necessary for growth, and they will provide opportunities for technological advancement. They're going to create high-paying jobs. Is there a way for these centers to coexist with residents who share their communities with them? Do you see that happening?
Not at this size, and not if it continues to be secret, if not letting people have a voice at the table. Explain to me what this is. Not if their utility bills are going to go up, not if they're going to lose their water, or their well water's lower, or they're having to dig deeper wells. And no environmental impact studies, zero information, zero oversight. If we keep that going, I think they will collide and they won't get along. And, you know, what I'm watching, and I don't like what I'm watching, is once again, we're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Here was some new industry that's coming in with no, again, oversight, no studies or anything. It just gets rammed down your throat and you have to accept it. And then we're going to find out 5, 8, 10 years later, oh, oops, this was a really big mistake.
Hey, Josh, can you put back up her website that shows these data centers? Because, Erin, since starting your website in April, more than 3,600 AI data centers have been cataloged on this interactive map that we're showing here. Right now, there are more than 4,300 data centers nationwide. Have you heard from any of the big companies involved in the construction of these centers? And what can communities do to push back and be heard beyond your website?
So I have not heard from any of the IT, tech companies. And we've had over 8,000 individual submissions. And this is people reporting what's actually happening in their backyard. We've pinned now over 4,700 reports. We're backlogged in getting the reports on there. But what I am seeing, and I have never seen anything like this in my career, let alone it be the entire country, a bipartisan issue, but how they are organizing. They are educating themselves. They are networking together. They are informing themselves. And the one thing that they're doing is showing up. They are showing up across the country. And, we are now seeing about 79 plus municipalities who are putting on bans, moratoriums, pauses. We want more information. We'd like some studies. We're seeing states now doing the same thing. And that is all coming from the people, their voice, and showing up again in numbers about how important this is at a very local level to their city councils, that you hear us, that you see us, and why this is going to be a problem for us.
Let me remind viewers, if they're interested, the website is Brockovich AI Data Center Reporting. Erin Brockovich, you keep on keeping on, and we're awfully glad for it. Thank you so much.
Back in 1988, almost no one had seen the film The Last Temptation of Christ. But even so, by the time Martin Scorsese's film hit theaters, it was already a national emergency, denounced from pulpits, picketed in the streets, condemned on radio waves across the country. The people leading the charge hadn't seen the movie either. They didn't need to. The outrage was the point. That's the story Isaac Butler tells in his new book, The Perfect Moment: God, Sex, Art, and the Birth of America's Culture Wars. It chronicles the origins of the culture wars and why we're still fighting them today. The grievances, the moral panics, the persecution narratives, the outrage machine, those were built decades before Trump rode down the golden escalator. Trump is less a maverick than a craven opportunist who leached into a system that was already cracking. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to 1988, the final year of the Reagan presidency. The Cold War was winding down, and as it did, Butler argues, many of the institutions that once gave Americans a shared sense of identity and meaning, the church, the family, the workplace, were entering what he calls a period of profound overlapping crises. The religious right saw an opening to seize power inside the Republican Party and across the country. And the machinery to do it was already in place. Back in 1979, the televangelist Jerry Falwell founded the Moral Majority, the organization that turned conservative Christians into one of the Republican Party's most powerful voting blocs and helped propel Ronald Reagan to the White House in the first place. Its mission was simple, a nationwide return to what it called traditional family values. At the same time, Donald Wildman, a Mississippi minister and founder of the Conservative American Family Association, was perfecting a different weapon, the organized boycott. Using church networks, direct mail campaigns, and activist pressure, Wildman spent a decade targeting corporations, television programs, and advertisers that he considered morally dangerous. So by the time Scorsese's film arrived in 1988, the infrastructure was in place. Wildman mailed action packets to 2.5 million people. There were petitions. There were fundraising appeals. James Dobson, an influential evangelical broadcaster, devoted an entire episode of his radio program to denouncing the film. He called it, quote, the most blasphemous evil attack on the church and the cause of Christ in the history of entertainment, end quote. He admitted he hadn't seen the film. What he hadn't seen was a film that imagined a fully human Jesus, one who doubts, one who suffers, and in a dying hallucination pictures an ordinary life before rejecting it for the cross. To its critics, a Christ who could even be tempted was a blasphemous Christ. To the architects of the outrage, the entire point was to whip everyone up into hysterics. Opponents of the last temptation of Christ cast themselves as victims. Christians, they said, were under attack. Isaac Butler shows how that strategy, borrowing the language of civil rights, became a defining feature of the culture wars, the most powerful religious bloc in the country presenting itself as a persecuted minority. Sound familiar? Perhaps you sat in a school board meeting over which books your children are allowed to read are discussed, or encountered a viral Facebook post about immigrants eating your neighbor's cats. Or maybe you've heard those rumors about transgender people lurking in women's bathrooms with no evidence of any threat, even as the real documented danger to women, sexual violence, overwhelmingly committed by cisgender men, is all but ignored. Curiously, these self-appointed guardians of women never seem as outraged by that very real epidemic. You see, the details change, the methods change, but the formula has remained the same. Back then, manufacturing outrage was expensive and slow. The Mississippi minister had to mail out millions of packets and buy time on hundreds of radio stations. Activists spent months building momentum. Today, all it takes is a post, a meme, or a smartphone with an internet connection. The outrage that once took months to manufacture now reaches millions in a matter of hours. But the perfect moment is not just about how the right won these fights. It's also about how often the institutions on the receiving end surrendered. In fact, the book takes its title from one of the biggest cultural flashpoints from that era, the photographer Robert Mapplethorpe's exhibition called The Perfect Moment. A handful of photographs were sexually explicit, but that was all the ammunition that the culture warriors needed. Conservative Senator Jesse Helms and Republican Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York were already attacking the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, furious that taxpayer dollars had helped fund work that they considered obscene. They wanted the NEA defunded, and any art they deemed morally reprehensible removed from public life. So when Robert Mapplethorpe's exhibit was scheduled to arrive in Washington, D.C. in 1989, the Corcoran Gallery caved. Its director canceled the show just weeks before its opening, fearful of losing federal funding. Americans today are no longer strangers to watching institutions capitulate, surrendering a little ground in the hope that the controversy will pass. But we know now that the controversy rarely does pass. American universities, media outlets, law firms, and cultural institutions keep convincing themselves that one more accommodation will finally make the pressure stop. It never does. It never has. It never will. 4 years after the backlash to Scorsese's film, the Christian conservative effort to police culture and dictate who belongs in this country finally got a name: America's Culture Wars. It was not just a political slogan. It was a culmination of a project that the right had been building for more than a decade. By 1991, the loudest voice belonged to Pat Buchanan, a Nixon speechwriter turned conservative firebrand who spent years warning that America was losing its cultural identity. In 1992, he took a rare and aggressive step. He challenged a sitting president from his own party. And the weapon he reached for was the very fight we've been tracing. His campaign took Marlon Riggs' Tongues United, an award-winning documentary about being black and gay in America, funded in part by the National Endowment of the Arts, and turned it into a political attack ad designed to make the government look like it was subsidizing obscenity. It worked. Buchanan took more than a third of the New Hampshire vote from a sitting Republican president. He rattled the George Herbert Walker Bush campaign White House so badly that the chairman of the NEA was gone within weeks. Now, Buchanan, you'll remember, ultimately lost the nomination, but Bush, desperate to hold his right flank together, handed Buchanan a primetime convention speech anyway, and Buchanan used that speech to declare what he called a culture war.
We disagreed with President Bush, but we stand with him for the freedom to choose religious schools. And we stand with him against the amoral idea that gay and lesbian couples should have the same standing in law as married men and women. We stand with President Bush for right to life and for voluntary prayer in the public schools. And we stand against putting our wives and daughters and sisters into combat units of the United States Army. There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself, for this war is for the soul of America.
Abortion, gay people, women in combat. In 1992, Buchanan drew a line through the country and demanded everyone pick a side. Between then and now, the promise of neoliberalism proved illusory, and trust in institutions collapsed. And since then, social media has fractured our shared sense of reality and amplified every grievance. So the idea that Trump brought the fringe to power gives Trump far too much credit. Trump, ever opportunistic, simply smelled blood in the water and leached into the crisis. What Buchanan preached from the fringe more than 30 years ago is now at the center of the GOP's platform. Many of you know these grievances are not new because you've lived through them before. You've seen this before. You saw that video. You probably watched that speech when it happened. What's changed is that the fringe that developed this playbook in the 1980s is no longer on the outside looking in. The National Endowment for the Arts, the very agency the right spent the 80s trying to destroy, is now being dismantled from the inside. Grant recipients have to certify that they do no diversity work, that federal money will not promote what the administration calls gender ideology. The vagueness, Butler notes, is the point. It's built to make the artists censor themselves and make the institutions censor themselves. Most of the agency's 2025 grants were simply canceled. But history also offers another lesson. The pushback is never that far behind. Again and again, Americans have shown a stubborn commitment to freedom of conscience and expression. When activists tried to literally buy The Last Temptation of Christ from Universal Pictures simply so that they could bury it, the studio refused to sell it. It published its refusal in a full-page advertisement in major newspapers across the country. The message was, quote, simple. If everyone in America agreed on religious, political, and artistic truths, there would be no need for our constitutional guarantees. Only in totalitarian states are all people forced to accept one version of the truth. In the United States, no one sect or coalition has the power to set boundaries around each person's freedom to explore religious and philosophical questions, whether through speech, books, or film. These freedoms protect all of us. They are precious. They are not for sale. We cannot accept your offer, end quote. Indeed, this playbook is older than America itself. When the Athenian playwright Aristophanes was attacked for mocking the powerful politicians, he responded with more satire. He was prosecuted for ridiculing the statesman Cleon, so he made Cleon an even bigger target in his next play. 24 centuries later, we're still reading Aristophanes. In ancient Rome, Emperor Augustus exiled the poet Ovid. And 2,000 years later, those poems are still the most influential literature in the Western canon. The same pattern appears throughout history. Books are banned, art is censored, ideas are suppressed, and yet they persist. The clearest example came in Cincinnati in 1990, shortly after the Corcoran Gallery in Washington canceled Robert Mapplethorpe's exhibit. That capitulation sent a chill through the museum world. One of the directors watching was Dennis Barry of the Cincinnati Contemporary Arts Center. He described the moment this way, quote, "That announcement really swept through the room like wildfire. All of us who were directors of museums recognized that the door had opened up for hostile censorship against our organizations," end quote. So when the perfect moment arrived in Cincinnati, Barry chose a different path. He refused to cancel the show, and the response was extraordinary. A grand jury indicted both Barry and the museum on obscenity charges. For the first time in American history, a museum stood criminal trial over what hung on its walls. Just think about that. The state was literally using criminal law to publish a museum for displaying art. Police even cleared the galleries and videotaped the photographs as evidence. We tend to think today's battles over censorship and political pressure are unprecedented, as we say. They're really not. Previous generations of Americans faced their own campaigns to narrow the boundaries of acceptable speech and art and expression, and it's worth knowing about them because they rarely end well for the would-be tyrants. The jury in the Cincinnati case deliberated for all of 2 hours. Then, in what became a landmark First Amendment victory, it unanimously acquitted the museum and its director on each and every count. 8 ordinary citizens were handed the question that culture warriors have never stopped asking: who gets to decide what Americans are allowed to see? And their answer was clear: not the government. That was 1990. Butler is writing in 2026. He does not pretend to have all the answers. What he offers instead is a poignant reminder of the one lesson history teaches us over and over again. Quote, "It is hard to see at this moment how we could possibly put these various Humpty Dumptys back together again, or as doing so is probably both impossible and unwise, what we should do instead. What I do know is that people have always made and will always make art. Part of possessing a consciousness is wanting to be known while also living with the fundamental mysteriousness of human beings, including ourselves. Art is how we enter that mystery and how we express it to the world. It is how we know and are known. History shows us that this aspect of our humanity cannot be stopped. The ability of those in power to control it is finite, even in the direst of circumstances. If we cannot keep faith with our nation at this moment, or with our government, or with each other, or perhaps we can at least keep faith with that."
Following pressure from President Trump, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles says it's opened multiple election fraud investigations in California. Yesterday, the office also sent a federal prosecutor to monitor vote counting at the Los Angeles County Tabulation Center. Trump and federal officials have provided no specific allegations of fraud occurring in this week's election. But the DOJ recently posted a tip line on social media asking Californians to email, quote, "credible information concerning election fraud." That move comes as President Trump, who obviously has a history of pushing election fraud conspiracies, continues to promote unsubstantiated claims of election cheating by California Democrats.
They're rigging the election right now, it looks like, in California. Can you imagine? It's 4 days, and they still aren't even close to telling you who won. You know why? Because they're rigging the election. That's why. Bad things are happening. It's a crooked state. We have crooked third world elections in a lot of our states, and we should pass our Save America Act.
Joining us now, California Attorney General Rob Bonta. Attorney General, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the presence on the ground and monitoring the situation, as you have said, looks like at this L.A. County vote counting facility, and actions that were taken by the federal prosecutor who visited the tabulation center, and whether or not there's been any specifics provided about these, quote, investigations that have been opened?
Sure. As you know, the right to vote is fundamental. It's the right from which all of the rights flow. And voting only works when voters can exercise that right without interference, intimidation, and fear. And Trump, unfortunately, has tried to impose interference, intimidation, and fear time after time. And we are going to protect the integrity of our elections, the safety, security, accuracy of those elections. And so when the Trump administration sent a federal official to LA County to inspect the vote counting process, we sent a monitor of our own to be on the ground, to be there, to be present, to observe, to ensure there was no interference or anything inappropriate. And so we had an individual there. And that was important that we did. We did that during Prop 50 as well, the election back in November, when the Trump administration sent monitors. We had observers to observe their monitors. And with respect to the statements by the first assistant in the Central District of California about some of the investigations that they say they are engaged in, there are no details. There is no specifics. There is no specific allegation of any individualized active voter fraud, and every count, recount, hand count, court case, and audit has shown time and time again, not just in California, but throughout this country, that there is no widespread voter fraud. It is only a figment of the imagination of Trump and others who follow that conspiracy theory.
You and other AGs meet often, I'm told, and probably on a group chat, let us in if you want to, but having conversations about what you guys are facing, the kinds of lawsuits when you guys are enjoining your states together. Donald Trump is showing what could happen in November. This federal prosecutor visiting this ballot counting facility in LA feels like a blueprint of what could happen. What are you and the other Gs, other AGs, what's that conversation like about what the prep is like? How are you defending the right to vote? How are you defending your states and the voters in those states from what could be the president of the United States, the DOJ, mucking it up?
Me and the other 23 attorneys general, we speak regularly. We're in constant contact, constant communication. We are assessing all of the potentially unlawful and actually unlawful actions of the Trump administration and preparing a response on behalf of the constituents of our respective states. We are better as a team than we are on our own, and we are committed to working together as co-equals, sovereigns, representing sovereign states, each ourselves. And one of the issue that has risen to the top of the list of concerns of our constituents has been concerns about voting integrity. I think a lot of people in our states expect a blue wave, but they are not sure that their vote is going to be counted, and that there would be interference, potentially could be interference from the Trump administration in many different forms, whether it be military or ICE at or near polling stations, whether it be interference with vote by mail through the U.S. Postal Service, whether it be the seizure of ballots. And we believe that we owe our collective constituents readiness, preparedness, a plan of action for every single one of those potential scenarios. And so we have tabletopped and gamed out each of these scenarios, and we have a plan. We're ready to move swiftly and quickly to block and stop any of these potential unlawful actions by the Trump administration, and we think that's what we owe our constituents.
So then, Attorney General Bonta, your tabletopping, your scenario planning. For instance, let's say President Trump decides to send either the National Guard or the military to California polling sites. What can you, as the Attorney General of California, do to either thwart that from happening or to bring the president to heel? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, elections are not federal. They're not run by the federal government. They're run by the states.
That's right. And to that last point, the Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution says that the time, place, and manner of elections throughout the United States of America shall be determined by the states and also to a degree by Congress. The president, the executive branch, has zero authority to dictate the time, place, and manner of the elections. And so if in the scenario you presented, if the Trump administration seeks to deploy the military, say it's the National Guard, to polling stations, we will be ready within minutes to go to court and secure an order blocking his attempt to do so. We have the briefing ready. We just need to cross the T's, dot the I's, and go to court. It is unlawful under federal law, under the law of the federal government, to have military or those with weapons at or near polling stations. So that is a blatantly unlawful action. It will take a court, I believe, a very short time to review our briefs and issue an order and have that military removed, dispersed from the voting area.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta, thank you very much for coming to the weekend. I know it's early out there in California.
Pleasure.